Hello, we are going to do a screencast on how to write a lesson plan. And in phonics, you will start with kind of a small, more simple lesson plan for the Phonological Awareness Lesson Plan 1. And we will build on this simple model of a lesson plan as the term progresses. We'll add things into the lesson plan. At this point, though, there are 8 things that you should be familiar with that are essential elements of a lesson plan. Now, you are taking notes on this and thinking about this work because you will be writing your first lesson plan. Lesson plan number 1 is due for the Tuesday class. So if you're in the Tuesday face-to-face class, your lesson plan is due on Monday, September 28th. And if you're in the Thursday online class, your lesson plan is due Wednesday, September 30th. We'll get started then, and you will want to have this empty outline, 8 essential elements of a lesson plan, and it will follow along with this screencast. So it'll be a way of taking notes, and you will not be submitting this empty outline. This is for your notes and to build your ability to write sections of the lesson plan. So print it off, and as soon as you have that ready, then you can continue with the video. All right, how to write a lesson plan. The first thing that usually is on a lesson plan is called a learning objective. Sometimes it's called a learning goal. A learning objective is a specific term in education, and learning objectives essentially have 4 things. The learning objective, I should first say, is your goal for the lesson. It is not what you're going to do. It is not a statement about what you're going to do. It is a specific statement about what and under what conditions you want students to learn. So it's about student learning. So the first thing you want to remember about a learning objective is that it states what students will learn. Second, you want to select an active verb. So you want it to be a verb that you can see happening. So not, I want the students to think about something, but I want the students to sort. You can see sorting. You can't really see thinking or appreciating, but you can see choosing and you can see sorting. And the nice thing about your first lesson plan is it's focused on phonological awareness. And the 6 phonological awareness tasks are your active verb. So when you write your learning objective, you will be saying something like the student will isolate, the student will blend, the student will segment, the student will substitute or delete. So those are the active verbs. The third thing you want to include in a lesson objective, a learning objective, is you want to make sure that what you're saying the students are going to be doing is observable and measurable. So again, you can't observe or measure thinking. So you don't want to write something like the students will think, no, about syllables. Instead, you could say the students will clap syllables. That's something we can see, and we could measure how many times the students were able to clap the correct number of syllables. Instead of saying the students will hear, the students will hear words in a sentence. We can't see them hearing, but we can say students will segment and segment words in a sentence by showing a finger for each word they are pronouncing. See, that would be observable and measurable. A lesson objective is also going to describe the conditions for learning. So conditions for learning are just a couple of words that kind of describe what's happening in the context when students are doing this work. And the last thing that is in learning objective is the criteria for success. So how will you know students have fulfilled the learning objective? And that's usually stated as a percentage. So students will show that they can clap the syllables in 2 to 3 syllable words 4 out of 5 times. So you could do 4 out of 5. So you could do it as a ratio, or you could do 75% of the time, which would be 3 out of 4 times, right? So those are the things that you want to include in a learning objective. By active verbs, this is an example of some active verbs. Enumerate, find, identify, label, list, tell, write, record, recite. Those are things you can observe and measure. Again, your active verb for this lesson plan number 1 will be blend, segment, isolate, match, delete, or substitute. All right, so here's an example of a learning objective. The students will segment syllables. So right there we have an active verb, segment syllables, in 1 to 3 syllable words by clapping, tapping, or drumming. That little phrase, in 1 to 3 syllable words by clapping, tapping, and drumming, is your conditions for learning. That's what's going to be happening that will help them segment syllables. And at least 3 out of 5 times is your criterion for success. And what that might look like is the little image on the left here. I'm going to hand kids the drum, and I'm going to show them the pumpkin, and then I'm going to let them clap pumpkin, and then tap it, and then use the drum to drum the beats. So again, your active verb is segment syllables. Your criteria for success is at least 3 out of 5 times. And it's very important to note that 3 out of 5 times is possible given the material that I'm showing you. I'm going to have kids do these 5 picture cards, and so they can get 3 out of 5. And then 1 to 3 syllable words by clapping, tapping, or drumming is the conditions. It's how it happens. Now, this little scenario or sentence stem, I guess, is how we write learning objectives. You start with the student or students will, and then your active verb happens. And for you in lesson plan 1, your active verb is one of the phonological awareness tasks. And then it's followed by your conditions, and then the last thing in this formula is to put the criteria. So this makes it easy to find the parts of a learning objective. So take a look at this learning objective and try to find the active verb, the criteria for success, and the conditions for learning. This learning objective is written for this particular activity in which I'm going to show kids a picture of the king, and then they are going to find things that rhyme with king. So they have some pictures here: ring, sing, sting, and hopefully they find wing and pop it on there. Take a minute, pause the video, see if you can find the active verb, conditions for learning, and criteria for success as outlined on your empty outline. And when you've found them, then proceed with the video. Pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you found that the active verb is matching rhyming words, and the criteria for success is 3 out of 4 times, which is possible, right? I have a card here, and I want to see them be able to get at least 3 out of the 4 matched correctly. And using picture cards, that's the condition. We're using pictures. All right, so you have 2 on your worksheet. Ben will isolate the initial phoneme, and the students will write sentences that feature use of initial capital letter. I want you to follow the directions on your worksheet and pause the video now, and then when you come back, you'll see what the answers were. Really, pause the video. Okay, so we are looking for, the criteria for success, 80%. The active verb, isolate the initial phoneme, And the condition featured in single syllable picture cards, right there it is. In this one, students will write sentences. Write sentences is your active verb. We can see that and measure it. That feature use of initial capital letter and ending punctuation. This is what we're looking for, the conditions. And at least 4 out of 5 times is your criteria for success. All right, now you have to, oops, sorry, did we do that one? Oh, here we go. Now I want you to decide which of these 2 learning objectives on your worksheet which is the better learning objective, and think about why it is. So look for the 3 pieces, the active verb, the conditions for learning, and the criteria for success, and then judge which of these is the better learning objective. Stop the video now. Okay. So education students will identify learning objectives. That would be something you could see identifying. That's the active verb. That include active verbs, that's the conditions, at least 3 out of 4 times. So it has all of the elements of a learning objective. You can see folks identifying. Actually, this task is an identifying task, right? Education 1700 students will learn about the components of learning objectives. Okay, we really can't see learning happening. We can see people choosing something or identifying something, but we can't see learning. So this doesn't have, it has a verb that's hard to see or measure. The conditions of learning are okay, but there is no criteria for success. So the first one is the better learning objective. All right, on your empty outline, again, here's a learning objective. I want you to look at it for this activity. So what we're looking for in this activity is I'm going to say the word is ball, ball. I want you to say the first sound or bounce it, and then match it to something over here that has the same first sound. So ball starts like dog or boy. And I would have multiple of these examples. So take a look at this learning objective, see if you can find the active verb, the conditions for learning, and the criteria for success. Stop the video now. Okay. Active verb, verbally isolate bounce. We can hear that because they're saying it out loud. The initial sounds of words represented on picture cards that match the initial sound of the initial letter of the target word. So here's my target word, and here's my 2 options. This would be a recognition task or a production task. Recognition, yes, because we're giving kids options. This is all the conditions, and 3 out of 4 times is going to be the criteria for success. In order for this criteria for success to work, we would need at least 4 of these options. All right, so now it's your turn. I want you to try to write a learning objective for using this material. So that means you have to look at this material and say, well, what is the phonemic awareness task involved in this work? So let me explain the directions that I would use for this work. I would name the pictures, fish, fan, leaf, and then I would ask students, which of these 3 words starts the same? Circle the 2 that start the same. So students are going to circle fish and fan. So think about, what is that phonemic awareness task? They would do these, circling the 2 within a line that have the same first sound. So write your learning objective. The students will stop the video, write your learning objective, and then we'll come back and compare what you wrote to other examples. Okay, hopefully you stopped the video. Here is an example. Students will, this is isolate and match. So students will isolate and match 2 good phonemic awareness terms, initial sounds in 1-syllable words using picture cards. This is the conditions for learning. That's how it's happening. And then I have written for my criteria for success 6 out of 10 times. What do you think? 6 out of 10 times. You're probably right. There are only 5 options on this page, so I can't do 6 out of 10. I could do 3 out of 5. So you have to do what's possible given the material that you plan to assess student learning on. So one thing you want to consider is what is possible. If I wanted to state this as a percentage, I'm not a mathematician, but I know this row would be 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. So I could say students will isolate and match initial sounds in one-syllable words using picture cards, and I could say 80% of the time, right? Because that would be 20, 40, 60, 80, 4 of these rows. What I couldn't say is 75% of the time, right? Because you can't get 75% of 5 trials. So make sure that whatever you state is possible given the material that you intend to measure student learning on. All right. So write a learning objective. Whoops. Okay. The one thing I want you to remember is that learning objectives are not always, do not always have to be measured by a worksheet. You've seen 2 kind of examples. One was of a worksheet, but let me go back to earlier. Whoopsie. Am I going earlier? No, I'm not. Let me go back to earlier where we were measuring success. This wasn't actually a worksheet, was it? It was more of an activity. So you don't have to use a worksheet to show the criteria for success. It can be an activity that you're observing what students are doing during that activity. The activity could also be an oral activity. So I could have an activity like this. Now I want you to listen to what I'm saying to students, and then I want you to decide what the learning objective for this activity would be. All right. So, class, I want you to listen to me tell you a sentence. And then I want you to show me a finger for each word in the sentence. The sentence is, I like dogs. Now show me a finger for each word in the sentence. Let's say the sentence together and you get the fingers ready. Ready? I like dogs. Now I could look at what students are doing and I'll make a little check mark on my notes if they're showing me the right number of fingers. And my plan is to repeat that procedure. I'm going to repeat that procedure 5 times. So this next sentence, class, is I like to play games. We're going to say that sentence again, and you're going to show me a finger for each word in the sentence. Are you ready? I like to play games. And the students will then show me how many fingers they have up, and I will make a little note in my chart to indicate which students were able to do that. Again, I'm going to do that 5 times. Stop the video and write the learning objective for that task. Okay, hopefully you did stop the video. And so what this could be is the students will, what were we doing? Were we blending, segmenting, isolating, substituting? Students will segment words in a sentence with 3 to 5 words in each sentence, at least 3 out of 5 times. Here is my active verb, segment words in a sentence. With 3 to 5 words in each sentence is my condition. At least 3 out of 5 times is possible if I was going to give 5 sentences. I could add to this. I could say the students will segment words in sentences given verbally. with 3 to 5 words, and I could say 1 to 2 syllable words in each sentence at least 3 to 5 times. If you were teaching this lesson the first time, 3 to 5 times might have been a good expectation for showing learning. Maybe you've taught this lesson a couple times and you want to increase that, so you change it to 4 out of 5. This level of certainty is dependent on your expectation, and that's usually relative to how much time kids have had studying this particular phenomenon. Okay, so let's go back to our slide and think about the next part of writing a lesson plan. The next part is the rationale. And the rationale is just where you explain why you have selected this learning objective for these students at this time. So we want to know, what was your thinking? Why did you decide on that learning objective? In your learning objective, you need to show the need for the instruction, and that means by showing assessment data. Now, your lesson plan number 1 is based on the PASS data for one student. You're writing a single student lesson plan, which is the right level of complexity for the first time you write a lesson plan. You're going to analyze that PASS data, and so in your rationale, you're going to say something like, Ruby is ready for producing rhyme because on the PASS test, she scored 3 out of 3 on recognizing rhyme and 1 out of 3 on producing rhyme. And since recognition is easier than production, we will move from the easier task, which she has mastered, to the more complicated task of production in rhyme. Something like that. So talk about the actual scores on the PASS that are informing your choice of this learning objective. And in my little explanation there, you heard explanation. You heard me explain why that target should be the next thing to be taught. So in our class number 4, we talked about what makes a phonological task easy or harder. The thing that I just mentioned in my quick rationale for Ruby is that she was able to show that she could master recognizing rhyme, and we know that recognition tasks are easier than production tasks. On the PASS, we are able to measure kids' ability to recognize and also produce rhyme. So if she's able to do the easier recognition task, then she's ready to start the harder production task. Explaining why your target is the easiest thing for the student to learn is a place where you're having to apply what you know about phonological awareness and what makes a task easy or difficult. So what this looks like is the learning objective is something like this. Students in 1700 will write learning objectives that contain active verbs at least 3 out of 4 times. Write learning objectives is my active verb. That contain active verbs is my conditions, and I want it to happen 3 out of 4 times. Here's my rationale based on data. 17 out of 24 students in Education 1700 were unable to write learning objective with an active verb. So the students weren't able to do this. In order to write useful lesson plans, 1700 students must first be able to write a clearly stated goal for the lesson. Learning to write the lesson objective will help students in the design of instructional procedures and learning assessments. So here's me using actual data to describe why this is necessary at this time. Here's another example. Jacinto, Gabe, and Ronaldo will blend syllables in 2 to 3 syllable words by stomping feet each time they hear a beat or syllable. They will do this at least 8 out of 10 times. And the rationale here is these students need this lesson because they scored low on this area of the PASS, and this is the easiest thing they need to learn. Okay, this is a bad example. And the reason it's a bad example is we don't have any actual data. these students need this lesson because they scored low. If that's actually true, you would want to actually show the scores for each student, Jacinto, Gabe, and Ronaldo, or show the range of scores. Jacinto, Gabe, and Ronaldo scored between 2 and 3 out of 9 on this section. And this is a bad rationale because this is not an explanation of what makes this easy. This is just the author saying it is easy, but not explaining why it's easy. Why is it easy for students to blend syllables as opposed to blend phonemes? This is the place where you can talk about it. It's easier to manipulate big sound than little sound. So again, sometimes you can learn from bad examples. So in your rationale, you are going to explain, show why this instruction is needed in the PASS assessment data. Actually show a score or two that helps explain what you're talking about. Explain why that target is the next easiest one to be taught. And then finally, you want to relate the work to a state learning objective. Our students in this data set are all in kindergarten. As part of Weekly Prep 4, you looked at a short video explaining how to read the Ohio Learning Standards, and then you had a link to the Ohio Learning Standards. And when you are recording the standard in your rationale, you want to include the alphanumeric code. So this is Reading Foundations 1.2C. So you'll put that code, and your code will come from the kindergarten standards. So yours will be RFK for kindergarten, and then some code here. And then you also want to include the text that is with that standard. So we not only know the number, but we also know the text that explains what it is that kids are learning. Make sure your standard matches the learning objective that you have. So we're looking in the kindergarten standards, but let's say you looked at all the kindergarten standards and you wanted to teach kids how to isolate the middle sound in words. And you found that, you know what, in the kindergarten standards under Reading Foundations, they don't actually ask kindergartners to do that. And they don't, because it's really hard, right? So if you go to the kindergarten standards and you don't find the standard, go up to the first grade standards, because really what can happen is sometimes you can have kindergarten kiddos who need work that is above or below the standards for their grade level. So for example, if you were going to ask or teach kids to isolate the middle phoneme, it's not in the kindergarten standards. You would actually have to look at the first grade standards. Here it is, Reading Foundations 1.2C, isolate and pronounce initial medial vowel and final phonemes in spoken single syllable words. That is something that's done typically in first grade. If your student's ready for it, by all means teach it. But remember, it's kind of beyond the grade level. That's a good thing to know. 3, materials. In your lesson plan, make sure that you either describe, which I think takes a lot of text and time to do. It's probably easier if you're thinking about using a particular kind of material to just create a picture of it. So take a screenshot of that material. You could take a picture of it, you could describe it, or you could recreate it and submit it. Since we do a lot of digital submissions, it's probably easiest if you just kind of take a picture of something that you're going to use. Now you got to remember that our kiddos are learning phonemic awareness. This is before they've learned phonics, anything about letters. And so beware of material that asks children to read or write. This material would be great for a phonics lesson, but it is not accessible for children who cannot yet read. So don't include material like this. Don't ask children to read or write. If you were in a huge pinch and you really needed to use this material, you could write that you're going to use this material, but you are going to cut the words off of the cards. But you should not be asking kids to read or write in a phonemic awareness lesson. Okay, So the materials that you're going to use to teach the lesson are very important. So make sure you don't just say, I'm going to use some picture cards. You go out onto the internet and find the picture cards that would work for you. So if I were going to teach a lesson on helping children match the initial letter sound, I love these cards because we have the thing we want children to match, the log, and then they say two pictures, lemon or belt, and they have to determine which one starts like log, the big picture. So kids know this is the target because it's bigger. And then once they choose one or the other, if I have these cards laminated, they could just put a mark over top of that. Or if I didn't want to bother with laminating and or cleaning those cards, I just have them take a little clothespin and clip it to this picture of the lemon. And that way I could see what they thought was the match. Here's another bit of materials that I could use for this. I could have objects and then two baskets, and I could ask students to put the things that start with in this basket and the things that start with s in this basket. We have a spider, the sun, sandwich, sunglasses. We have milk, a mouse, and a mop, and I'm not sure what that is. Okay, you get the idea. Materials are important, so find good ones. Again, this material is not terribly useful because it's asking kids to sort these pictures and use these letter cards for the criteria of the sort. So this would actually be a good phonics or alphabetic principle lesson. It is not material for a phonemic awareness lesson plan. 4, you want to have a way to start your lesson. So how are you going to transition students into new learning? Well, one thing you always want to do is connect new learning to known material or past learning. So always start with a little bit of review. And so if I were going to teach Ruby how to produce rhymes, I might be basing that on the fact that she already knows how to recognize rhymes. So in my opening moves, I might say something like, you know what, you are so good at picking out the word that rhymes. So I'm going to show you 3 cards, and I want you to pick out the 2 that rhyme or sound the same at the end. And I might do that 4 times as a way to kind of build some momentum for the lesson. Start with a tiny bit of review. And then tell kids what the purpose of the lesson. You are so good at noticing which pictures rhyme. I want us to practice finding rhymes not in pictures, but in our head. That's what we're going to do today. And so you want to try to hook kids' interest in the work. Start with review. Tell them what they're going to learn. This is just a little 2-minute section, 3-minute section of the lesson. 5, this is the biggest part of the work, procedures. Procedures are basically what you are going to do in this lesson. And you are going to write these in steps, just like we did in class this week. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Try to envision what the work is going to look like, and that will help you record the details necessary for someone else to envision what the work looks like. Remember, in early childhood education, small things make a big difference. So if you're trying to get kids to segment words and sentences, it's really important for them to have some kind of visual example of what you're having them do. And the way you show people what you're thinking you're going to do in a lesson is you include some prompting language. So here I have some quotes. What are you going to say to kids? You don't want to write everything you're going to say, but write the things that you're going to say that are particularly important. Specifically, when you're going to explain a new concept, that's really important to write down. What's the language you're going to use to explain that? And then anything you're doing with your hands or manipulative, those are your stage directions, and you want to put those in parentheses. So here's an example. When I'm trying to explain what isolating the first sound is, here's how I'm going to say that in my procedures. I'm going to say, bounce the first sound with me like this, d, dog. Now you try it. And when I'm doing that, here's my stage directions. I'm holding a picture of a dog. That's important. So be sure to provide a clear demonstration of the new concept and an opportunity for students to practice the concept with support, either from you as the teacher or from, most of the time, it's with a partner. So when you write your procedures, you're going to actually see there are two parts to it. One is the clear demonstration. How are you going to explain or demonstrate this concept of sorting, blending, isolating? And the second part is guided practice. How are you going to help students practice what you've just explained to them in a way that they can get help from a friend and or from you? So on your worksheet, you have an example of a clear demonstration of a new concept and guided practice. So I want you to just read through this example and then we will move forward. So you want to pause the video and read through this example.